Now, I have the honor to present Drude Dahlerup. She has an extremely long CV. At the moment, she's a professor of political science at the University of Stockholm and a consultant of international organizations, and I could continue. So, could I just be so bold as to say that in many ways she's been a pioneer within Nordic gender equality work. And she might be almost what we could call within gender equality a rock star. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kira. A rock star. Well, let me start by saying that I'm very happy to be back in Iceland. After Denmark and Sweden, Iceland is my third home. And I want to congratulate the organizers for this fabulous conference. It has really been amazing and thought-provoking and taking up all the difficult questions, in fact. And I will congratulate you with that. I will, based on this conference, and based on the celebration of 100 years of women's suffrage so far in Denmark, in Iceland, 2013 in Norway, and we're already preparing the celebration in Sweden, 1921. I would reflect on how are we really constructing the history of the women's suffrage. Through the lens of today. How are we using it? And I guess that all of us who have been engaged in this, we are thinking of this celebration as a way of revitalizing the gender equality debate, which has been a little bit slow, right? At least in Denmark, maybe in Iceland also, in Norway, less in Sweden. And I will tell you of some phone calls which I get increasingly because of all this discussion of the celebration and the 100 years of women's suffrage. And this is a schoolgirl, and many schoolgirls are calling me on the phone. I don't know how they get my phone number, but I have a Danish phone, even if I'm in Stockholm, which they don't know. And you get it in Danish first. So here is the first one. She says, Hej, det er Anna. Jeg går i 9. klasse på Strandskolen, og jeg skal skrive en opgave om kvindebevægelsen. Og jeg skal være færdig på fredag. Hun ringer onsdag. Og så spørger hun, hvordan var det at være rødstrømpe? And I translated in English. This is a schoolgirl. It's about 14, 15 years, and she calls me. She doesn't know I'm in Stockholm. She's calling from Denmark. Never mind, I have a Danish phone. And she says, hello, this is Anna. I am a schoolgirl, and I'm writing an essay about women's movement. Can you tell me how it was to be a feminist activist? And the most interesting, and this is my point here, is that they all end this way. Did you achieve what you were fighting for? And first time I heard this question, I got so amazed. Of course we did not. I mean, of course we need a women's movement. And then I take the whole thing with them and say, okay, we still have a gender gap. Oh, yeah. And we have rape. You cannot go in the dark streets at night. Oh, no. And you have only 25% women professors at the university, and most of the economic elite are men. Oh, that's what you mean, right? And then we have new problems like sexualizations of the public sphere, the public room. We have pornography. We have lots of new problems. Oh, yes. I take my time because I think those are the coming feminists. And I'm still amazed about that they can think that we have obtained what we were fighting for. So that raises the question, when is it that we don't need a feminist movement anymore? That depends on how we define the problem and our diagnosis of the problem. And I think it was you, Pomsile, who in the middle of the United Nations fantastic building at the CSW suddenly said, "We want to dismantle patriarchy." I loved that. I loved the way and the frank way you could say that. I think we maybe have lost this kind of language. We used it a lot in the 1970s and 80s. I can tell you that together with a Dutch scholar, Monique Leinhardt, I wrote a book 2 years ago which is called Breaking Male Dominance in Old Democracies. And by the way, the Stockholm has written a chapter in this called Breaking Male Dominance in Iceland by Extraordinary Means. And when I proposed to Oxford University Press that we should use this title, Breaking Male Dominance, I thought they would protest and like a title of Women, Politics and Democracy, right? But they accepted that without any problems. Maybe we have been too timid in our language. Maybe we should not be so afraid. This is also something to do with the way, especially in the Nordic countries, we have looked at the course of history. We have had, maybe I should say, a genuine optimistic view that gender equality is going forward, right? This was what our mothers told me. Even my mother told me that if you fight hard enough, we'll come forward to achieving our goals. When I grew older and read what she was writing, I saw that she didn't believe that, but it was a good thing to say to your daughters, that gender equality is going forward. And I think that deep in our heart, we think that, or we have thought so. I mean, the other theory, this is the theory of the time lag, it's just a question of time, then you get gender equality. The opposite of this theory is the theory of the constant reproduction of patriarchy. And even in the 1970s and 80s, the feminist movement, we use the language of the constant reproduction of patriarchy. I'm sure that down in our heart, deep in our hearts, we're believing that we were on the way, we had progress coming. And this is new, that now we know there are backlashes, we know there are new problems coming up, and maybe we are the last region in the world to realize that, because so many countries in the world live in times of conflict and war, economic crisis, and know that backlash is a possibility. But we have not really realized that until very recently, especially, of course, here in Iceland, but also 1990s in Sweden with the economic crisis. So we have to be realistic and see what the problems are ahead of us. And I want to tell you, this is 1984. We are Nordic Forum in Oslo. Some of you may have been there. I was there. It was the most fantastic. I think it was a high point of the Nordic feminist women's organizations, very broad. Usually I make a distinction between feminist organizations and women's organizations, but here they were, all of them, all women's organizations. And I had a job together with a Swedish journalist to put questions to the Nordic gender equality ministers. And there were 500 women behind us, very eloquent and very vocal. And we got small notes saying what we should ask those ministers about. And one of the questions I put to the Danish gender equality minister, a conservative man who was definitely never been a feminist, saying, when will we achieve gender equality? And you know what he answered? He said, I think that when we have solved some problems of gender equality, there will be some new problems. And you know what? All the 500 women said, boo, boo, meaning that he was disappointing the optimistic, that's my interpretation, the optimistic idea of gender equality coming up. So all 500, including me, said that he was totally wrong. Of course, we were solving the problem of gender inequality. Today, of course, I think he was right. So I think that we have to look at what we have gained and what the problems are and the new problems coming up. I think that we have something we know we can do. by the way of gender quotas, we can change women's historical underrepresentation, and we have done it. You know, today there are 86 countries in the world. I work on gender quotas, electoral systems, as a consultant around the world. 86 countries in the world now have gender equality measures by quotas to increase women's parliamentary representation. About 30 other countries, including Norway, Iceland, and Sweden, have voluntary party quotas, especially parties on the left. In contrast, what was said yesterday, 2 countries, namely Denmark and Finland, have a very high women's representation without any kind of gender quotas. So we know how to increase women's representation, women's part in decision making, and also by the laws now on women in the public boards, women local councils, we know that. And therefore the next step is, of course, that now we have to develop policy gains that we can really make work, we can make change the world, and we can make them global. Because the gender quota thing is a global thing, and we have worked on that. Now we have to develop some, I suggest some specific goals which we can really work on globally all over the world. I hear the discussion about essentialism. I'm so tired of it, I must say. Take the question of gender quotas. Here are the paradoxes. Gender quotas is about the numerical representation of women, period. It's not about whether women will or are willing to use the decision-making positions to make a difference or not. Also, conservative women have the right to be there, non-feminist women. So it's about numerical representation. Secondly, the women's organizations and the feminists who are fighting for more women in political decision-making want women to make a difference, right? And this is, of course, as a researcher, a hopeless question. What difference do the men make in politics? This should be seen as an empirical question. When are women able to work together? When do we have many feminists, for instance, in parliament? When do we have fewer feminists in parliament? What does the women's movement mean? What are the structural conditions for making differences? There are choices also, choice between, I was asked also by the press, what about the new Danish women's prime minister, who's not there anymore, the first women prime minister? She has a choice. Does she want to be a Margaret Thatcher, or does she want to be a Gro Harlem Brundtland? Margaret Thatcher had no other women in her government. She was, in fact, in spite of being the first women prime minister, she was reconstructing patriarchy in her government. Gro Harlem Brundtland had a 50-50 government and wanted to have a gender equality agenda. So, gender quotas is about the numerical only, the descriptive representation. The women's movement want, of course, gender quotas for women to make a difference. But the parliaments, all the 86 parliaments in the world who have passed quota laws, and even in Rwanda or Bolivia, who has a female majority now, of course, it was a male majority who passed the quota laws. Quota laws are passed for multiple motives, and many of them are not feminists. You have to realize that this is the way politics work. If you work for my budget, if you vote for my budget, I vote for your gender quota law. Something is like that is going on. So this makes me also raise the question of how are we using the 100 years celebration? And I think there are some, well, allow me to be critical to some of the things that has been done and been said. For instance, in the Danish context, it's been said that there were many men who were working for women's suffrage. There were leagues of men, and we should research more about them. Yes, of course we should. Right. So then he said, the next sentence, that therefore women's suffrage campaign for suffrage was not a fight between men and women. Wrong. It's the wrong way of putting it. It's like saying that because there were some whites in South Africa who were supportive of black people's voting, this was not a conflict between whites and blacks. We should not use the present day's longing for harmony, the present day's longing for consensus on the suffrage campaign. Because the problem is here that you're blind to the structural barriers women meet. I mean, the women who were fighting for suffrage was up against a patriarchal system which was so strong that it was almost impossible to go against it. It was a cultural patriarchy, an economic patriarchy, a political patriarchy. Inequality was written into the walls of Parliament also after women enter it. And this is a problem when you see this as a question, when you're blind to the structural barriers that were there at this time and are still here. It's like saying that we don't have racism because people say I'm not a racist. Racism is a structure of society. Or today saying we don't have sexism because I don't discriminate women, so what's the problem? You can hear this kind of talk especially a lot in Denmark among the Nordic countries. And let me also say a word to Kira, our lovely moderator, and you might correct me if I take you wrong, but I think that you said something, and we should remember it was men who gave women the suffrage. Should we be grateful? No. Of course it was men who gave women the suffrage. I mean, women were excluded for political decision-making. So of course we were not there. So we should not go against what the suffragists themselves did when they made this the 5th of June 1915 in Denmark, a big manifestation, going to the parliament and going to the king. They said deliberately, this is not a manifestation of thanks. You do not thank for things you should have got long time ago. So let me end by saying that, well, I am an optimist in my heart, even if I also can see all the problems ahead. War, conflict is always strengthening patriarchy. But there are fantastic amount of gains which we have done. And one of the gains, and let me end by this, is our conception of democracy. When the people who were fighting for the suffrage, they were also up against the idea that you could talk about democracy even if women didn't have the right to vote. Did we call Switzerland a non-democracy? Did we boycott Switzerland before 1971? No, we didn't. And you don't have to go more than 20, 30 years back, also here in Iceland, than when you had a government with only men, it was seen upon or considered a trustworthy, strong and not a government you don't criticize because this is a trust, these are the strong people of the country. Today, you cannot make a government in almost no country in the world, maybe not North Korea, but I don't know if they have governments. At any rate, you cannot have a government without women, and the acceptable minimum of women have been increased. In Sweden, Norway, you have to have 50% men and 50% women, unless there's if not, you will have a public outcry. In Denmark, it's about 30%. And you would not today say, and this is also in the Binding Platform for Action, a real democracy is one where the elected bodies mirror the population. And gender parity is now being a criteria for seeing a country as a democratic country and a modern country. And that's why, for instance, lots of countries like Algeria, several others, are now promoting women's representation by quotas because they want to look modern. You can criticize them for that, but it is an effect of the strong women's movement, and especially the strong feminist movement, that today, as you can see it in the Binding Platform for Action and other declarations, we don't think a country is democratic if women are excluded, not just from the vote, but if you don't have almost a parity in the elected assemblies. We have gained that. We have lots of other things to gain. Thank you.